Welcome to Immigration in the United States class. As America is best known for a land of opportunity, many immigrants chose to start their new journey of life in this country, including Jewish people. The Jews or Jewish refers to people related by birth to the ancient people of Israel, and also refers to people without any Jewish ancestral background who have converted to Judaism. Before the World War II occurred, the Jewish population around the world reached its peak to about 16.7 million, and then about 6 million Jews was murdered during the Holocaust conducted by Nazi Germany. Based on data from the Jewish Virtual Library, in 2020 there were about 7 million Jewish people living in the United States, with a majority living in New York, California, Florida, and New Jersey.
Jewish immigrants who come to America can be divided into three waves. Firstly, Sephardic is the first group of Jewish immigrants that come to America, and they are the descendants of the Jews who live in Spain and Portugal. The factor that drives them to immigrate is the social reason or religious freedom. For centuries, Sephardic Jews have been faced with the difficulty that has forced Jewish people to give up and lose faith in their religions. 1492, Spain forced Jews to flee the country or convert Judaism to Christianity. In March 1492, King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, along with Thomas de Torquemada, Grand Inquisitor of Spanish Inquisition, who was extremely hostile toward Jews and likely influenced the issuance of the Edict of Expulsion. As you can see in the picture on the slide, the king and queen publicly announced the command in April that allowed Jews to stay in Spain, but they had to convert to Christianity. If Jews chose not to convert, they had 4 months to leave the country or face execution by the Spanish Inquisition. The Jews who left Spain couldn't take gold, silver, or coin with them. They could sell their personal property to fund the journey, but they could only get letter of credit for the value of the item. Then, before 1881, mass immigration from Europe and the Ottoman Empire was on the rise, and Jews began to relocate to what is now the United States of America. By the freedom of the United States, Jews assimilate into American society by contributing socially, politically, and economically. Sephardic Jews' immigration to the United States allowed for a cultural transformation of the Jewish religion and drove a vision of religious inclusivity in the United States. That is why they come to America. They fled after the reconquest of Brazil by the Portuguese and arrived in New Amsterdam, which is now New York, in 1654. Under the Dutch control of the colony between the year of 1654 to 1664. The first and only established Sephardic Jewish community was located in New York City. Several decades afterward, adventurous Sephardic and Ashkenazic merchants established home in American colonial port, including Newport, Rhode Island, New Amsterdam, which is later New York, Philadelphia, Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, and Georgia. With the large colonization of Sephardic Jews in New York, many Sephardic Jews were also drawn to and settled in Newport and Rhode Island. Both Rhode Island and New York were states known to have high level of religious tolerance. This attracted Jews to settle in this area due to the ability to live as a Jew freely. Secondly, Germany. This group migrated to America 3 periods in Jewish history. After the failed German Revolution in 1848, the second group, which was older than the first and more educated, came to America because they wanted to fight democracy. In 1904, the Tsarist government, Russian government controlled by the command of the monarchy or all power to hereditary monarch, established the Pale of Settlement, an area extending from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Jewish settlement in the empire was restricted to that area. Jews in the Pale also had restrictions placed on their employment. The majority were merchants, shopkeepers, and craftsmen. Then the third group started to move out and come to America because of the persecution, restrictive law, economic hardships, and the failure of movement in their own countries. And they looked to America as a place of economic and social opportunities. The German Jew immigrants were mostly young men. German Jewish start doing job as a trader or start a small store in their small town, and their community grew up by expanding themselves and settling in smaller city and town in Midwest, West, and the South. Jewish spread out for help to establish American Judaism as a national faith. Cincinnati is the German Jew invention cities and entrance to trade in Midwest and West. Cincinnati, which is the town in Ohio, became the seat of American Reform Judaism and home to the movement's first American leader, Isaac Mayer Weiss, an immigrant from Bohemia.
The period between 1820 and 1880 has generally been considered the era of German Jewish immigration to the United States. Moreover, the problems of gender and family were the important push factors for German Jewish immigrants as well. For both Jewish men and women from the poorer classes, marriage became an increasingly remote option. In the 1820s and 1830s, a number of jurisdictions, or the official power to make legal decisions and judgments in the Germanic regions, established limitations on Jewish marriage. These restrictions affected not just the number of Jews who could marry, but it had implications for issues of economic class as well. Even though the beginning of German Jewish immigration was young and single men, unmarried women came in large numbers as well. Also, because so many of these female immigrants were unmarried and arrived without any parents or children, they could take advantage of economic opportunities wherever they arose. But in some cases, entire families joined the immigrant stream. And this is a survey of Jewish immigration from Germany during the first year of Nazi regime. It shows that Jewish and political refugees fleeing Germany did not enter the United States in any appreciable numbers. So the annual quota for immigrants who were natives of Germany remained largely unfilled.
Thirdly, Eastern European Jews began to immigrate to the United States in large number after 1880. Let's get back before they immigrate to America.
Because of the overpopulation in Europe, therefore between 1880 and the onset of restrictive immigration quota in 1924, over 2 million Jews from Russia, Austria-Hungary, and Romania came to America.
Then the Eastern European Jews became the majority. Then, after the tragic event of the Second World War, thousands of homeless European Jews entered the United States. Since then, American Jewish communities have also been improved by the diversity of Eastern Jews, especially from Iran and Syria. Following the collapse of Soviet Union, there has also been another influx of Russian Jews. Unlike the earlier Russian immigrants, these Soviet Jews have had limited opportunity to maintain Jewish ritual and tradition or to study Hebrew. This picture, A Happy New Year, shows that under the Imperial Russian coat of arms, Russian Jews lie on Europe's shore as they gaze across the ocean or want to migrate to the States. On the left side on picture show that waiting for Jews and welcome them to their new home under an American eagle holding a banner with the legends, "Shelter me in the shadow of your wings." The overall reason why Eastern Europeans move out are pushed out of the Europe by overpopulation, cruel legislation, and poverty. They come to America because they want to find a better financial and social advancement.
As Jewish immigrants had sewing and tailoring skills they acquired in the old countries, they were able to work in the garment industry or clothing production in New York, where the possibility of employment was provided. However, there were many unskilled immigrants who only learned some skill at home as well. This kind of industry exploded after the Civil War, and it was the first American workplace for many newly arrived Jews. Many garment manufacturers operated their businesses in very small factories, or even in their own apartments where the immigrants lived. The area of the garment industry can be called the garment district or the fashion center, which is located in Manhattan. It was considered one of the few jobs open to Jews in the 19th century Europe, so the Jews had to take unsafe working conditions and low wages. Because of unsafe working conditions, an infamous tragedy took place in 1911. When the Triangle Shirtwaist factory located in Greenwich Village caught fire. It led to 146 deaths of workers, and many of them were Jewish immigrants. However, by 1910s, almost all of the workshops and factories were owned by Russian Jews, and 3/4 of the workforce remained Jewish. Moreover, the Jewish immigrants also worked in cigar manufacturing, food production, and construction, which became part of a growing ethnic economy as well. The Eastern European Jews bring the visionary that influenced American Jewry. Many of the workers supported socialism or communism as a means of securing economic and social equality. In this manner, the Eastern Europeans established a strong link between American Jews and liberal politics. Yiddish theater in New York is where Eastern Europeans brought with them unprecedented support for Jewish nationalism. They educated the American Jewish community on this topic. This theater became a major cultural institution in which all the problems, hopes, and dreams of immigrant Jews were dramatized. It provided a collective experience for the entire community. It also encouraged members of the audience to feel connected to both the American and the Jewish worlds. The most important thing is this kind of theater was built by the immigrant Jews coming in from Eastern Europe. Then, the Russian Jewish immigrants is the next topic that I'm going to talk about. Before the struggle began, Alexander II, an emperor of Russia who was well educated, convinced that Russia needed reforms. He relaxed some of the restrictions placed against the Jews of Russia by his father, Nicholas I, including abolishing the Cantonese system of Russification which had been established in 1827. He also allowed some Jews to live outside of the area known as the Pale of Settlement. Then a dark period of Jewish history began. Their putsch factor began a decade before the opening of Ellis Island, when Alexander II was assassinated in 1811. A month later, there was a wave of pogroms spread throughout the southwestern area of Russian Empire. Pogrom refers to Russian authorities against Jewish people, which means they were officially mandated to be killed, and they also became a scapegoat or were blamed for violent and political acts. During the 1880s, the Russian government enacted anti-Jewish legislation. Next, let's begin with the first wave of Russian pogrom. The first violence broke out in Elizabethgrad, Ukraine, and then spread to 30 other towns, including Kiev and Odessa. Murderous outbreaks against Jews continued through 1884 in Belarusia, Lithuania, Yekaterinoslav, and Rostov. Next is about the second wave of a Russian pogrom. It started in 1902, first in Czestochowa. The Cossacks, members of democratic, self-governing, semi-military communities, attacked a Jewish neighborhood. In 1903, an anti-Semitic newspaper blamed the deaths of 2 children on Jews, resulting in 49 murders, countless rapes, and hundreds of homes destroyed, leading tens of thousands of Russian Jews to flee. In Chisinau, in 1905, political protests became anti-Semitic attacks. On June 11, 1906, the assassination of police chief Tkachev in Bialystok brought 3 days of violence and the murders of 200 Jews by Tsarist soldiers and police. The result of the pogroms and policy led to a re-examination of Jewish life in Eastern Europe and the future for Jews in Russia. About 2.3 million Jews left Russia between 1881 and 1930, with a great majority coming to the United States, North and South America, South Africa, and Australia. Other Jews began to turn towards self-defense and the concept of Jewish self-determination, leading to the origins of the Zionist movement. So let's talk a bit about this movement. Zionism became a central theme of American Jewish life in the years between the World Wars. Supreme Court linked Zionism to the American ideal of democracy, of social justice, and of liberty, and arguing that to be good Americans, we must be better Jews, and to be better Jews, we must become Zionists. The opponents of Zionism argue that Jews should aim to be accepted as full and equal citizens of the countries where they live. Where Zionists stressed that Jews were people who needed a homeland, anti-Zionists insisted that Judaism was a religion that Jews should be free to practice anywhere in the world. Moreover, this anti-Semitic wave, the pogroms, led Jews to the conclusion that only by taking destiny into their own hands could they protect their own well-being. That meant going to places where freedom and liberty might be practiced, or building their own place for guaranteeing those rights. The need for a Jewish territory was further reinforced after the second wave of pogroms began in 1903, and once again as a result of the Holocaust more than 3 decades later. Also in May 1882, His son, named Alexander III, established May laws, which was a series of anti-Semitic laws in this period. These laws restricted where Jews could settle. Then, in 1891, Jews were systematically expelled from Moscow. The result is the latter came largely as single men, while the former were entire family groups, and the last wave settled in the urban centers. Within the Russian Jewish masses who came to the States were groups of Hasidic Jews. Most Hasidim who immigrated to the United States in this time period maintained a strict Orthodox way of life. So let's come to the summary. Eastern European Jews ensured a more religious, diverse American Jewish population. The Eastern Europeans did not feel comfortable with Reform Judaism. Their insistence on maintaining tradition contributed to the establishment of conservative Judaism and introduced Orthodox Judaism with new energy and purpose. Starting a new life in the States is not that easy to achieve as many people might think, because there are many unexpected and long-lasting obstacles or problems during the journey. The most obvious issue that many Jews have faced in America is called anti-Semitism. Scholars have pushed back in the history of American anti-Semitism, discovering that no period in American Jewish history was free of this terror. In other words, Jews confronted it from their earliest days on American soil, and some Jews themselves also did this. By 1924, when about 2 million Eastern European Jews had immigrated to the States, many native and German-born Jews in America looked down on these newcomers as social inferiors and felt conflicting toward them. They feared that immigration was provoking anti-Semitism and worried that the East Europeans would never assimilate. However, in the 20th century, when problems such as immigration restriction and bills aimed at abolishing America's commercial treaty with Russia arose, German Jews and Eastern European Jews planned strategy together. But Jewish people still face physical attacks and many forms of discrimination in print, on the airwaves, in movies, and on stage. The next example happened in Atlanta, which began in the year 1913. A 29-year-old Jewish factory superintendent named Leo Frank was convicted of raping and murdering Mary Fagan, a 13-year-old employee of the Atlanta pencil factory that Frank managed. After his death sentence was commuted by Georgia's governor in 1915, a mob broke into the jail and lynched him. Frank became the only known Jew lynched in American history, and his trial had far-reaching impacts. It struck fear in Jewish Southerners, causing them to control their behavior in the region closely for the next 50 years, until the civil rights movement led to more important changes. Also, numerous American universities worked privately to limit the number of Jewish students they admitted. The harshest Jewish restrictions also occur in fraternities, clubs, hotels, resorts, and elite neighborhoods. We also have an example of one of these problems showing in the movie named Gentleman's Agreement in 1937. It is a story of a reporter who pretends to be Jewish in order to cover a story on anti-Semitism, and personally discovers the truth of bigotry and hatred.
I have a reservation. Double room bath, today through Thursday.
In what name, please?
Green, full of green.
Yes, Mr. Green.
My wife will be here tomorrow.
Oh, yes.
One more thing.
Yes?
your hotel restricted?
Well, I'd hardly say it was restricted.
No, it's not restricted.
Would you excuse me a moment, please?
How do you do, Mr. Green?
How do you do?
In answer to your question, may I inquire, are you, do you follow the Hebrew religion yourself, or is it that you just want to make sure?
I've asked a simple question. I'd like to have a simple answer.
Well, you see, we do have a very high-class clientele, and, naturally,
Then you do restrict your guests to Gentiles.
I wouldn't say that, Mr. Green. But in any event, there seems to be some mistake, because we don't have a free room in the entire hotel. But if you'd like, perhaps I could fix you up at the Brewster Hotel down near the station.
I'm not staying at the Brewster. Look, I'm Jewish, and you don't take Jews. That's it, isn't it?
I never said that.
If you don't accept Jews, say so.
Don't raise your voice to me, Mr. Green. Speak a little more quietly, please.
Do you or don't you?
Mr. Green, I'm a very busy man. Now, if you want me to phone for a cab or room at the Brewster, I'll do so. Otherwise
what?
What we found is it is true that Jewish has faced anti-Jewish discrimination in American hotels presenting in that scene. However, the restrictive clauses had decreased, and colleague quotas had mostly ended by the early 1960s.
Secondly, Johnson-Reed Act. On May 24, 1924, Congress passed the Immigration Act of 1924, also known as the Johnson-Reed Act or the National Origin Act. The act was meant to solve the midnight race problems and establish a more permanent immigration law. This act is biased because it created new quota which heavily favor England and Northern Europe, and set much lower quota for immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. The new law reflected anti-Catholic, anti-Semitic sentiment in the countries. After that, the Johnson-Reed Act also assigned that potential immigrants present their paperwork and receive U.S. immigration visa at consulate abroad before going to the United States. Then, the State Department became responsible for enforcing the quota law, and midnight race ended. Later, in 1926, the new quota were recalculated by using complicated math based on the existing national origin of the population as reflected in the 1920 census, and the new immigration cap and the new immigration amount limited increased to a total of 153,879. As a result, the quota for the British Isles rose, while the quota for Germany fell significantly, as well as other countries, especially Poland, which contained a pre-war Jewish population of 3.5 million, but they had a quota of only 6,524. And Romania, which had a Jewish population of nearly 1 million. They had a quota of only 377. Thirdly, Truman Directive. Allied victory brought an end to the Nazi terror in Europe in May 1945 and to the war in the Pacific in August. 6 million European Jews had been murdered. Hundreds of thousands of Jews suffering from starvation and disease, and they face a hard situation in a world which still seemed to have no place for them. On December 22, 1945, President Harry Truman favored a liberal immigration policy toward displaced persons. He issued a statement known as the Truman Directive while the congressional inaction. Truman announced that displaced person or DPS would be granted priority for US visa within the existing quota system. Later, under provision of the Truman Directive, many Jewish entered the United States between December 22, 1945 and July 1, 1948. Moving on to how Jewish people assimilate to America. They can be split into three categories. First, learning English and American tradition. Education was the key mobility to the next generation. At New York Educational Alliance, countless Jewish immigrants took class where they not only learn English, but they also learn about American habits. According to the Beth Wenger, a director of the Jewish Study program at the University of Pennsylvania, the number of Jews learning English is numberless, and they mostly attend night class of New York evening school. Many immigrants master only basic English, but they send their children to public school in overwhelming numbers. Second, festivities. Christmas calls Hanukkah a festival of light or a Jewish festival. As in a song mentioned that, to remind us of day long ago, meaning that celebrating the recovery of Jerusalem and following with the rededication of the Second Temple. On the Hanukkah, Jewish people were basically lighting the candle, playing a dreidel, and eating oil-based food, and not buying gifts for others. Then, in 1904, for Jewish immigrants feeling pressure to eliminate their European ways. So they start adapting to their new home by exchanging gifts with neighbors at Christmas time. Third, intermarriage. At first, American Jews have been debating the impact of intermarriage for decades. Does intermarriage lead to assimilation and weaken the Jewish communities? And they quite disagree with intermarriage at first. The turning point in how U.S. Jewish community will intermarriage was a 1978 speech by the then head of the Reform movement, Rabbi Alexander Schleider. He argued that rather than sitting Shiva or regretting for those who intermarry, we should instead focus our effort on kiruv or outreach and providing Jewish education to the children of intermarried parents. The Jewish community was stimulated to welcome and not rejected intermarried families. During the past 20 years, the national intermarriage rate has reached 52%. That is half of marrying American Jews marry someone outside the Jewish communities. This is a clear evidence of the social acceptance Jews have found in America.
Before we go to the next section, here is your question. What are the pros and cons of immigration to USA for Jewish people? Even though the Jewish population seems to be a small group comparing to other religious groups in the States, there are many famous people directly related to Jewish that we have never known before. The first person is an American actress named Gwyneth Paltrow. You must be familiar with her because her famous films are Iron Man and The Avengers. She was born to a Jewish father whose family was of Eastern European Jewish descent with roots in Minsk. Second person is an American playwright named Arthur Miller. His father was Jewish and of Polish Jewish descent. He wrote many screenplays and his famous stage play is Death of a Salesman. The last example is a German-American politician named Edward Salomon. In the 19th century, he joined both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and then became the first Jewish governor of Wisconsin. He was also a cousin of Edward Selig Salomon, the future governor of the Washington Territory, who was considered to be one of the highest-ranking Jewish heroes in the American Civil War.
Let's talk about 3 contributions to American culture created by Jewish people. Firstly, film, television, theater, Hollywood are the enormous influence. By the 1930s, Jews dominate the film industry as almost all of the major production companies were owned and operated by Eastern European Jews. For example, first, Goldwyn Pictures, established by Samuel Goldwyn from Poland. Second, United Artists, by Al Lischman from Hungary. Third, Universal, set up by Carl Laemmle from Germany. Fourth, Warner Brothers, created by Sam, Jack, Albert, and Harry Warner from Poland. Jewish actor and performer including the Marx Brothers and Sammy Davis. Jewish American director including Mel Brooks and Woody Allen. Second is literature, beginning with the memoir and petition composed by the Sephardic immigrants who arrived in America during the mid-17th centuries. Jewish American writing grew up over the following centuries, including fiction, poetry, and drama. In the 20th centuries, Jewish American novel by Henry Roth, Saul Bellow, Bernard Malamud, Chaim Potok, and Philip Roth were most fully developed. Their work explored the conflicting pull between the secular society and Jewish tradition, which were acutely felt by the immigrants who passed through Ellis Island and by their children and grandchildren. For example, Call It Sleep by Henry Roth. The book is about a young boy growing up in the Jewish immigrant ghetto of New York's Lower East Side in early 20th centuries. More recent, authors like Paul Auster, Michael Chabon, Jonathan Safran Foer, and Art Spiegelman have continued to examine the dilemma of identity in their work, turning their attention especially to the Holocaust and the trend of both ongoing assimilations and culture rediscovery exhibited by younger generation of American Jews. Modern Jewish Americans novels often contain a few or many Jewish characters and address issues and themes of importance to Jewish American society, such as assimilation, Zionism, Israel, and anti-Semitism. One of the example novels is The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. It's a 2000 novel by American author Michael Chabon that won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2001. The novel follows the life of 2 Jewish cousins before, during, and after World War II. Magazines such as The New Yorker have proved to be instrumental in exposing many Jewish American writers to a wider reading public. Therefore, Jewish American literature holds an essential place in the literary history of the United States, containing tradition of writing in English as well as in other languages. The most important is Yiddish, which is the language of the Ashkenazim from Central and Eastern European Jews. Thirdly, cuisine. Jewish food tend to evoke image of Ashkenazi comfort food like gefilte fish, Sephardic dishes like couscous with vegetable, or Middle Eastern delight like falafel and hummus. But with nearly 6 million Jews, approximately 40% of the world Jewish population migrating to America as their new home, American Jewish cuisine has become a category by itself. Moreover, many of the tribe's most iconic foods such as blitzes, borscht, and briskets, which were considered normal regional cuisine in the countries where they originated. Afterward, it was not until Jews moved to the United States and continued eating this food. Jews bring their culinary tradition to America. The majority of American Jewish food can be defined by two common themes: packaging and plenty. Firstly, packaging. As Jewish immigrants transitioned from life as a poor people living in slums to business owners, they began to package and market their food. Companies like Manish White and Ubed became synonymous with American Jewish food. Secondly, plenty. Jewish food took on distinctly American-sized proportions. Jewish holiday meals and weddings were all about quantities, or it was called traditional Jewish cuisine. The dishes that are supersized are for people with humble origin only. There are many delicious American Jewish cuisine, such as pastrami online is a classic sandwich made famous in the Jewish kosher deli of New York City. Next is chopped liver. It's a liver pate popular in Ashkenazi cuisine. This dish is a common menu item in kosher Jewish bistro in the United States. Next one is latke, is a type of potato pancake or fritter in Ashkenazi Jewish cuisine that is traditionally prepared to celebrate Hanukkah. And the last one is lugalash. It's a filled pastry product originating in the Jewish community of Poland. It is a popular treat among Jews in America.
The last part that I'm going to talk about is the relationship between Jewish and popular media in the States. First of all, while many ethnic groups have entered the spotlight of American film and television, Jewish characters, for the most part, have remained in the darkness. Even though television and film have depicted Jewish characters in the past, they didn't focus on their characters, and American film has been unwilling to focus whole projects on Jewish culture. However, there was a change that let the Jewish characters come out from the shadow and serving as the other, to take a proper place in American mass culture through the 1930s. During this period, many immigrants from Eastern Europe wanted to hide their Jewishness, both in their personal lives and in their films. They never could erase their Jewishness, but they could purify and Americanize themselves, and their films provided a perfect place to create their vision of the States. Their main need for producing films was to represent characters who were ethnically cleansed. It means that they avoid Jewish subjects, gave little work for Jewish characters, and anglicized the names of Jewish stars. Moving to the 1940s, films with Jewish characters still did not represent different features of Jewish culture and religion. What was concentrated on was the unity of all ethnic groups. Next, in the 1970s, many productions did not bring America closer to Jewish culture or tradition. A good example is an American television sitcom named Rhoda. This TV show did not directly challenge the idea of the Jewish as other. The fact that a Jewish woman was the main character in a primetime TV series, given cultural stereotype of the possessive and demanding Jewish woman, was itself an important change. Since the 1980s, films with Jewish characters were becoming more clearer. To clarify, intermarriage is normal, and assimilation is a natural process. The film and TV industry is now at ease with Jewishness. For the Hollywood Jews, being fully accepted in America has enabled them to often project an ethnic awareness in their films, so they can differentiate themselves from the American mainstream without asserting a separate religious or cultural identity. Then, in the 1990s, Jewish characters are coming out. Not only film, TV directors, and writers will accept their characters, but they also might be used as pop culture role models for Jews. Film and television characters have been described as American dreamers. The Jewish characters among them show us that it is possible and desirable to be Jewish and American, just as it is possible to be from another cultural or authorized group, and still be an American in that dreamy sense of being democratic, tolerant, and caring. Another reason for the dramatic increase in Jewish characters in film and television is surely the desire of Jewish writers, producers, and directors to show Americans that Jews do have specific cultural and religious traditions that are reasonable subjects for popular media to explore. The result is the image of the other is slowly disappearing. I want to introduce you to a film that gained critically and some popular access named Avalon. It challenged the Americans to learn and accept the complexity of Jewish culture. Avalon is a story of a Polish Jewish family, the Krasinski, who migrate to the USA and try to secure their personal and professional lives. However, they face many issues while adjusting to the American culture and lifestyle. There are three important viewpoints showing in this film. Firstly, a story of Sam Krasinski's life, a first-generation immigrant that comes to the melting pot and is for Americanization. He encouraged his son, Kay, to be successful in business, and also tells his grandson, Michelle, not to do a job like many wallpapers as he did. Secondly, it is a story of the second generation of Krasinski family, Kay and Kirk. They represent the successors of the American dream. First, they become Americanized by changing their first names. Next, both are living isolated, unlike the very first scene of this movie that shows many family members living in the same house. Plus, they mostly focus on their own family and business, not the big family meetings. Lastly, it presents Grebel's aspect, one of the Krasinski members who stick to family tradition. He disagrees with the family that moving out to live in the suburbs and complains about how far it is when he has to go for Thanksgiving. In the beginning, all of his family members of Krasinski always keep in touch with each other by organizing a family cycle meeting, even though they all get married. As time passes, with the popularization of TV, the tradition of sit-around-the-table meals turns into TV shows. They lost their sense of familial and personal communication and became TV addicts like Americans. It also shows that this family can be assimilated into American tradition, which is celebrating Thanksgiving. So that Jewish tradition has slowly slipped away. As time passes, all members try to work their way up and follow American dream. In the end, all of this led to the deconstructions of family tradition, and they end up separating from each other forever, even at a family member's funeral. So these are all about today's class. Thanks for watching.